Good morning, Papists. Brian with City of the Immaculata, finally back with you. It's been a little while. I had a lot going on. What do I have here? This is one of my favorite icons. It is the icon of Christ, the Son, the Word, the Logos, laying out and ordering the universe. And the theme for today is to Christ through math. You heard me right. To Christ through math. Now you may be thinking, okay, Brian, what are you on about now? Well, you have to wait to find out. But I wanted to begin with my favorite icon because it's going to tie directly into the conversation that I want to have with you guys today. Oh, and it's also going to lead me to not the next week. In a few weeks, I've got a live set up about my favorite argument for the existence of God, and it's directly related to this particular icon. So that's just a little bit of foreshadowing there for you all. So today's conversation is going to be specifically about culture and community and the building up of culture and community. I recently have written a book. It's been several months now. I've been kind of working on it in the background in terms of editing and getting some feedback on it. But I wrote a book on the process of enculturation in the church, in terms of specifically enculturating. In this book, I'm mainly focused on the topic of how non-Christian, non-Jews, non-Muslims, so basically everybody else, are enculturated, how they're converted and how they're brought in. The faith is brought into their world, into their worldview, and how it changes their worldview and shifts and adapts and evolves their worldview. And as well, I've been building for the last several years, specifically for the last 3 years, as far as the Integrated Life project that I told you guys about last time. I've been working on that for, 3 years now. And then as a wider phenomenon of my life, I've been working on it for many more years than that, most of my adult life. Thinking about community, thinking about culture, thinking about how these things come about. I had a vision, this would have been 7 or 8 years ago at this point. When I converted to the Catholic faith, I came in through a very well-established, very traditional parish, traditional in the true sense of the word, not the traditionalist parish, but like a wonderful parish that was well-established. And my wife and I, we were recently married at the time when all of this was happening. We had spent a few years at this parish, and we got to become friends with a priest who was actually at a parish that was a little bit closer to us, up the street from where we lived. And he was kind of hinting around at times about us coming to join his parish. And this priest was our age, right? He was a young priest, recently had become the what is it? What are they called? Is it just the parish priest for this little city parish? And he was kind of hinting, "Hey, Brian, have you ever thought about coming over to my parish? Right? You're closer, technically, like we were within his range." And in my mind at the time, I was kind of like, well, I didn't say this to him, but I'm like, that parish has a little bit of a reputation, right? A little bit, dare we say, boomer. And I was like, I don't know if I want to, but eventually we, for whatever fortuitous circumstances, we started going over there, my wife and I, specifically, I think me at first, and then my wife started to attend. And there was a lot of problems with this parish and this community. It had suffered the devastations of the 70s and 80s thoroughly, and it was still like reeling from that. And he was this young priest. He's like newly assigned here, and he's like David against Goliath. The liturgy was really bad. The parish had been wrecked. A lot of things were just really awful and bad about this particular community. The music was really bad. I remember the music being especially grating, like distractingly grating. And yet, as I was sitting there and I'm looking around and I'm thinking about who this priest is as I've gotten to know him, and I'm looking at this parish. This was an old church, man. I'm talking like for America, this is an old church, like 1800s. It's had its damage done to it by the 70s, but I could see like behind that there was something there, and I had this vision. I've never actually even spoke about it, I don't think, aloud. I've thought about it to myself many times since, but I had this vision sitting in that parish of a vibrant Catholic community that was bursting at the seams in a beautiful parish, in a beautiful church, lines around the block kind of thing. And you would think, like, at the time, like, Brian, you're a madman looking at this parish, right? Like, you're a long ways away from anything that resembles even anything like that. But I'm like, you know what? I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to get behind this priest. My wife and I are going to start attending there. And sure enough, I would say when he took over the parish, there was one family there with children, one family, and they had like 2 kids. And I was told that the entire community was like invested in these, like this poor family and these 2 children, because it was all that they had, right? Within 2 years, I would say, of my wife and I being there, you started seeing families show up because he started making these like subtle changes. And then within 4 to 5 years, the changes had been done. Like, we're doing renovations to the parish. He's changing the liturgy. He got a new music director, which made a huge difference, like overnight. And all of a sudden, this parish is actually like bursting at the seams. And one of the things that he did is he came to me because he knew I was sort of like, I was all in on this. Because he said, Brian, I'd like you to teach the RCIA if you would. And at the time, I was kind of like, I never taught the faith. It was like not something that had been on my radar. And he was actually, I'll tell you, he was a good priest for the sense that he was able to look at people and spot their talents. And in a leader, that's a very important quality. But he was very good at seeing the people around him and saying, okay, this person, this is their talents. This person, there's their talents. I'm going to put these people in these positions. He saw in me something I didn't see in myself necessarily at the time. And I said, okay, Father, I thought about it, prayed about it. I said, look, I'll do it on one condition. I went through the RCIA process. I know what I liked and didn't like about it. Can I build my own RCIA from the ground up? He said, as long as it's solid and orthodox, which I know you are, I have at it. So I basically came up with my own curriculum. And I'm not trying to brag here. I'm not trying to like toot my own horn. This is all by the like power of the Holy Spirit that we're even able to do any of these things. But I went from 1 or 2 catechumens at a time to within just a couple of years, word had kind of like, it was a small enough city and a small enough community that word can like spread, which is an important thing, that it was like standing room only. And it actually became like some of the older Catholics who had like maybe lost their way. I used to have it on the refrigerator. They were like still attending the mass, but they hadn't really like ever known their faith. They started attending the RCIA class. And that was a little controversial at first with Father, and I had to like kind of convince him because he was like, well, they really should be going to something else. But I was like, look, they want to, like, whatever reason. So we eventually got them in. I had this lady, she was a lifelong Catholic, an Italian woman, lifelong Italian Catholic, whole generational, Sicilian long lines. And she wrote this wonderful letter to me, and it ended up going into the bulletin, like just rave reviews about this RCIA class. And yeah, it was literally standing room only RCIA class. And the idea for me, going all the way back to that initial premonition that I had, which it came to be. And I'm not saying I manifested it. I don't believe in that. I just know that I think the Holy Spirit gave me the eyes to see what was potentially there. And then through the hard work, building this thing up. And now my wife and I have left. We've moved on from that parish. But we are very proud of the community that we built there. And it's thriving. And the parish has been almost, I would say, like 99% completely restored. New priest came in, and that new priest was like a solid priest to take over from the work that the previous priest had done, because that's always a concern, right? That you're going to have the new priest come in and he's going to undo all of this stuff. But that didn't happen. And this parish, I think you're going to see in 100 years, this parish will be still thriving from the work that we did today. And I've always had this vision of community and culture because it's something that there was like residual remnants of community and culture in my childhood. My grandfather on my mother's side, I've talked about him on this channel before. He was born in Derry, Ireland, came over into the United States. And so much as he was alive in my lifetime, there was a strong sense of Irish identity and community. And I saw it. And like, I look back on that from my childhood, and it's like, I yearn for that. I ache for that. I want that, like, to be a part. And it sort of dissipated in my life. And I think many of you probably watching this, maybe you've had it in your lifetime, maybe you didn't, but you know what I'm talking about. And there was this, like, well, for one thing, there's this idea today, I think, among Catholics that culture, let's just say community and culture, that it's something like, I don't know why this has happened to Catholics. I think it's probably programming from the Western secular worldview that we've been living in. I would actually say I know that's what it is. That culture and community is something extrinsic to your Catholic identity. And many of you have bought into that secular line. Maybe not people that watch my channel so much, but many Catholics have bought into that secular line. That the church does its stuff over here, and that's your life over here, and the stuff that you do that's Catholic is over here, and everything else is over here, right? Never shall the two meet. And in so much as you do the stuff over here, the secular stuff, if you will, you can't have that be secular qua secular without having it being overtly Catholic. Does that make sense? So like the people that are over here that believe that the stuff that they do that's Catholic, maybe they yearn to have that like secular identity mixed in with their Catholicism, but they think that it needs to always be this overtly Catholic thing. And I think that's actually the big lie of the secularists. And the libertarians they've eaten this up hook, line, and sinker from the secularists. That you can live in this sort of like polyglot culture where everything that you do in the public realm exists kind of in a vacuum and on a clean slate. And there's nothing that's going to be pressed onto that secular bubble extrinsically from the people that are taking part in it. Now, you could maybe say that certain secularists are capable of doing that. Maybe. You could maybe say that certain Protestants, especially secular leaning Protestants, or even secular leaning Catholics, can do that. Muslims can't do that. Orthodox Jews can't do that. And Catholics, in the true sense of being Catholic, can't do that. Everything that we do, even if there's no reference explicitly to Christ, to the church, it needs to be permeated, saturated, enculturated in all the stuff that we do. And that doesn't mean that we're like beating the secular world over the head with our rosaries. It just means that everything that takes place in the secular realm needs to be forced through the grid and the prism of our Catholic identity. I saw recently the guy that runs the Catholic Culture website, him and I talk sometimes on Twitter, and he shared a tweet where if I read it correctly, there was a person that was criticizing him for doing movie reviews, like secular movie reviews, saying, well, those movies aren't Catholic. Like, why are you reviewing these movies? That's not Catholic. One person that I think that really gets this, he clearly gets this, and it's in the name of his website anyways, Catholic Culture, right? But that's the thing that I'm talking about, right? Like, so this person criticizing thinks that in order for us Catholics to comment on anything, to be involved in anything, well, then that thing has to first be Catholic in order for us. Like, we have to go in and like hammer in the Catholic Church into these things. A person, I think, who had the proper hermeneutic and lens of how to deal with culture is now Bishop Robert Barron. And when I first heard of Bishop Robert Barron was about the time that I was converting to the Catholic faith. And he would have these little videos on his YouTube channel where he was doing commentary on culture, especially like media. He was watching these movies, and he was pushing these movies through the lens of the Catholic Church. And that, to me, was extremely powerful message. As someone who was a film buff when I was young, one of my all-time favorite movies was the movie Fargo from the 90s. I'd watched it a gazillion times, never through the lens, never putting on that Catholic glasses and watching it through that lens. But now that I've, like, all these years later that I've listened to Bishop Barron's review of that movie, you can't not watch that movie and see Christ in the church in that movie. And there's so many others that, I mean, Bishop Barron was fantastic at this. So then that takes me back to this icon. To Christ through math. I was trying to think as I was getting ready for this. I don't remember off the top of my head whether sometimes as you get older in life and you're thinking back on the years, I don't remember if this was something that somebody told me personally or if it's something that I like heard online or something. But I heard somebody say one time that when they were young, they went to a private school, and this was a while back when the nuns were still teaching. And the nun, I don't know whether it was a specific one, there's a few variations on this, but the nun had an image, you know, like on the school wall, like teachers' walls, they'll have like positive thing, like posters and things like that. Well, this nun had this picture of Christ laying out the order of the universe. And the quote below this icon said, to Christ through math. And that has always struck me, that the image of that, because that's exactly what I'm getting at. You would think, right? Oh, I'm sitting in this class and this is math and I'm learning math and I don't want to learn math. What does that have to do with anything, especially religion, right? But we know as Catholics, we put on that lens that the Logos is the great orderer of the universe, and that all things, even math, come to us through Christ. So you don't get to geometry or the higher levels of math and structure and order without Christ. And so by learning math, you're actually getting closer to the truth. And we know ultimately that the truth is the Catholic Church. And that's what I think that we need to, that's how we as Catholics need to be approaching cultures and communities. One of the things that I'm particularly concerned about and scared about is I went on like a, the algorithm starts to feed you on YouTube sometimes if you're watching something. And I went on a kick recently of watching some of these like travel vlog videos. Some of them are really good. Some of them are awful, but some of them are really good. And the ones that I watched, the one that I was super fascinated in is there was a guy, I can't think of his name. Tom, I think maybe. Yeah, maybe Tommy. And he was traveling around through China. And look, I had always bought the lie about China that it was just an industrial wasteland. But China is actually a pretty interesting country if you follow this guy's travel vlog and the places that he goes to in China anyways. But the one thing that was really disturbing to me in all of these vlogs across the world, people are traveling all over the place. There seems to be this monoculture shift that's taking place where all of the world's cultures, and I think this is primarily driven by first just the introduction of modern media and communication, and then it's just been the stakes have been anteed up by social media and things like Instagram, where one person with a popular account can share these ideas to someone around the world, and then the next thing you know, everybody starts doing it. And this guy's over in China. And look, when I go to China, I'm not going to China. But when I go to China, I want to experience Chinese culture. I don't want to experience American culture. I can get that right up the street. I, at the very least, want to know that it still exists. And that seems to be dying. All around the world, that seems to be dying. And we seem to be like transmorphing into this like uni-Western culture, secular culture. And I'm like, guys, you're a communist country. I get it. Like, things aren't the easiest for you there. Makes total sense. But like, don't abandon your culture for us. Look at our culture. Please come check it out. Look at our cities. Don't do it. Stop. All of this stuff was done originally in the name of cultural diversity. And cultural diversity is really nothing but the death of culture. Cultures don't form through a universal inclusivity. Cultures mostly formed through exclusivity, from defining features. We are this, we are not that. Therefore, this is our culture. Now, there's always been crossover. There's always been pollination, in and out influences. I get it. Those things have always happened. But they usually happen in a much more organic sense. An idea comes into a community, into a culture, and it takes root and it plants. That's how the gospel works, right? It's how it should work anyways. But we've moved on to something different, and we need these. What I believe that we need is places where we as Catholics, in all of our unique expressions and all of the unique things, and look, trust me, guys, as someone who was not Catholic, who was not even really Christian to speak of, and who is now Catholic, you guys have a treasure trove of unique things about you that if you had communities, you could make that community identifiably Catholic. By a person that walks into the community immediately would spot it and recognize, oh, I'm in a Catholic community now. I know where I'm at. We need these places where we dominate, where we enforce the norms, but we are a long ways from that. I talk a lot on this channel about this book right here, The Art of War. Isn't that flashy? You guys like that? Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And now the reason I talk about this book so much is because he has an emphasis on strategy, strategizing. And I think that Westerners, with all of our talents, we're very industrious people. We're very clever in many ways. I don't think that we're the best at long-term strategizing. In fact, I think we've been historically really bad at it. I mean, if you study somebody, like even just study the Arabs, the Arab culture, for example. I've talked about it on this channel before. It should be no secret to you guys. I spent a lot of time. I'm the 9/11 generation, right? I'm a millennial 9/11 generation. I spent a lot of time studying Osama bin Laden. And if you just, I mean, this is like war strategy here, right? But if you look at his war strategy, 9/11 was, in his mind, an attempt to get us to commit soldiers and troops to a Middle Eastern country, specifically Afghanistan, wherein he could bog us down in a 20-year war. These are his words, in a 20-year war that we would be bankrupted from, our resources depleted, our morale defeated, and then we would leave with our tail between our legs. What happens in Afghanistan 20 years later, right? So keep in mind, bin Laden is ethnically an Arab. The Arabs think in these terms, these 20-year, 30-year, 40-year, they think in long-term strategizing, and that's what The Art of War is about. Now, I'm not saying we need physical war to build our communities, but there is a culture war that's taking place. I think all of you would recognize that and admit it. Now, Sun Tzu says at the very beginning, one of his first lessons is that if you are weak, you want to appear strong. If you're strong, you want to appear weak. Now, I'm going to make the case that for building communities, for building Catholic communities in this culture, while I agree with Sun Tzu there that where you are noticed, in so much as you are noticed, you do want to appear to be strong, because we're not strong right now. Our communities are very weak. They're very, in so much as they even exist. Like, we are not the dominant culture of America right now, by far. We've made some coups and some inroads, but by far we are not the dominant culture. And I get what he's saying, right? He's saying, look, if you have a powerful enemy and that enemy is looking at you and knows you're weak, it is going to suppress you and attack you. So you need to have the appearance of being strong. I would argue, though, that for building culture, the ideal scenario would be that they don't even know that we exist. And that's going to be key to my point that I want to make today. There was in Quebec, in Canada, a thing known as the Quiet Exodus out of the church. Basically, what this was over a period of years, decades, Catholics in Quebec just stopped going to church. They stopped being institutionally Catholic. There was no scandal per se. There was no particular thing that caused this. That's why it's called quiet. It happened only in hindsight did people realize gosh, where did all the Catholics the French Catholics in Quebec go? They're gone. It's called the Quiet Exodus. What I think that we need is the opposite of that. We need a quiet takeover, a quiet, hostile takeover. And then, over the period of years, decades, once we get to the point that we are actually in our communities the dominant force, only then do you actually begin to do things like enforce cultural norms, enforce these kinds of things that we say as Catholics need to be a part of the culture. Now, I know, I don't think anybody in my audience would say this, but there's going to be people out there that are oh, you're talking about enforcing your beliefs on other people's, and that's so mean, Brian. We need to be nice about these things. Well, that's part of the big lie of secularism. And I think you guys either know it or you at least intuitively know it, that humans, we don't exist in a we don't exist with the ability, let's say, to work with clear blank slates, even playing fields. Human beings, the saying, nature abhors a vacuum. We struggle with balance. We struggle with these kinds of things. In theory, would it be nice if we had a society where, yeah, it doesn't matter what you are. I'm just speaking hypothetically here. You come into the community and you can be whatever you want and you can do whatever you want. And you don't try to, like, you don't force that on somebody else. You just be you and I be I, and never shall the two meet. That doesn't happen. And that's the big lie. That's why when Megyn Kelly gets ratioed on Twitter, if any of you guys missed that, and she's actually ratioed by someone who I'm not even a fan of, by Andrew Wilson's wife, Rachel Wilson. I have to agree, Rachel Wilson was right with this specific tweet, because Megyn Kelly is on there saying, well, it's the whole debate about whether or not women should be working. Megyn Kelly, libertarian that she is, her argument is, well, we just shouldn't tell women that they should be stay-at-home moms. And we also shouldn't tell them that they should not go into the workforce. Okay, Megyn, this is what everybody really seems to miss, in that if you go through and look at the people are either saying, well, it's one or the other, but what people I think miss, which is the sort of meta narrative to the whole thing, is that we don't live in a society where the society says it's okay for women to choose whether to be stay-at-home moms or corporate boss babes, or whatever they call them now. What is it? The girl boss, or whatever it's called, right? Like, we don't live in that even playing field. What we live in today is overwhelmingly the vast majority of women in the West don't believe that being a stay-at-home mom is anything other than a form of modern slavery. And why is that? Because that's what society, that's what this even playing field society has taught them. That's what they believe. It's one or the other. And the argument that I would make, as somebody who emphasizes society, community, culture over individual desires, that we would actually be better if the emphasis, because it's going to be emphasis one way or the other, the emphasis was on the other. But we're not going to get there. I don't personally think that we're going to get there by beating up Megyn Kelly. In many ways, the cat's already out of the bag. I think what we need to do is to clandestinely, quietly take over communities, existing communities. And then we need to keep our mouths shut about this happening. We don't need to blast it to people online. I saw, and it's made the round several times now. It's probably a few years old at this point, but there's an article from Crisis Magazine which talks about the best Catholic communities in America. And it's a list of 10 different little towns and cities across the United States, which are the most traditional, whether that be, TLM traditional or otherwise, communities in the United States. And I'm like, guys, all that is a big fat bullseye, right? We already know that the feds have targeted traditional communities. Why are you announcing yourself? Have you guys never read your Sun Tzu? Do you not know about having strategy, having long-term plans to maneuver and to not I feel like it's this need, and traditionalists are super guilty of this. They have this need to be seen and heard, see me, hear me, right? Where if you just kind of like quietly did the work, what we did, this was, I'm telling you guys, this parish that I was at, and I'm doing it again where I live right now. And I'm not going to blast it online, right? Where this community is being built up. And I'm not going to blast where I did it before. It wasn't the hardest work in the world. You do a few things correctly. It made me think, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come, right? The community will come to you. The community will grow. And an aha moment for me. I remember talking to the same priest from back in the day when we were building up this community. He had a picture on his website of the parish. And remember, I said this parish had been wrecked by the 70s and 80s recavation that had taken place. And when he went to the website, it was that old picture of the parish from the 80s. Wall-to-wall carpet, really awful pews, just like boomer parish, right? I said, Father, why don't you update the website to show all this beautiful work that you've done? And he said, the less that people know that it's happening, the less people will try to stop it from happening. And once it's happened, then nobody will go back and try to undo it, or they'll have a very difficult time trying to. Whereas if I'm trying to do it, if I'm in the process of doing it and I'm bringing all this attention to myself, I could very well end up bringing negative attention to myself. So we need to be doing the quiet work of building the kingdom. And then once that pivot happens, sure, then we can, start announcing ourselves a little bit more. But that pivot takes time to get to. And I feel like the traditionalists, God bless them, but they do this to themselves all the time. They bring way too much attention to themselves. Traditionis Custodes, anyone? Like they act like they're so surprised that they got their traditional Latin Mass slapped on the wrist when all they do is announce themselves and complain instead of just like being humble, being quiet, being obedient, and not bringing attention to yourselves. It's just this need that they have to be seen and heard. And then look what happens to them, right? Like we don't want that happening. And in our cultures that we form, in these communities that we form, the emphasis will be on family, on the clan, and then on the state. So yeah, and in the truest sense of the word, this is subsidiarity, right? This is the order of love that our beloved vice president caused a stir with a few weeks ago. Catholics at one time, we did this. We had Catholic communities. The problem was that the emphasis in these communities was always on, in the United States specifically here, the emphasis was always on upward mobility. And as Catholics moved up the economic ladder, we dispersed, we spread out, and we lost our communities, and therefore, I think, our identity in the process. I knew a lady, she was Lebanese, and she was having a conversation with me we were at a event one time, and she said, "Yeah, I was born and raised in a Maronite parish." And I said, "Oh, you're Lebanese then?" She said, "How did you know that?" I was like, "Well, I just, you spend time studying these things, you learn who people are, right?" But, so the Maronites this parish that she was raised in, she said she ended up leaving that parish and coming over actually to this. She was a member of this parish that we had built up. And I said, "Well, why did you make that move? Why did you leave the Maronite parish?" And she said, because the Lebanese community there was so insular that she felt like outsiders weren't welcome. And I get that. I get what she's saying. I get the complaint there. We don't want people to come into our communities and feel like we don't want, let me just say, we don't want Catholics to come to our communities and feel like they're unwelcome. But I also understand, as an ethnic community that's trying to keep your identity in the polyglot mess that is the United States of America, that you do need to have a little bit of insularity and a little bit of exclusive mentality to sort of stave off some of that, what we know happens when these communities get too caught up in the secular culture. So our goal, our goal here in this place that I'm at right now the primary goal is to make sure that our children don't pack up and leave. We in the community that I'm in right now, and I'm very much involved in sort of building up the community. One of the things that we're talking about is, how do we keep the children here? When they become adults, we don't want them packing up and moving, because we need them. They're the ones that are going to repopulate this place when we are gone. They're going to take over the parish. We want them. And from there, their children's children and their children's children. And that's when you end up getting the kind of numbers that you need. So that's really one of our main goals. Like, we're trying to build up communities. And I loved, we transplanted, we moved to a different place where these ideas that I have been bringing into my mind and my life and my worldview, this is a place where I feel like we can make that difference. Now, I will say, as far as the integrated life goes, this thing that I'm working on in my channel, it does have a little bit more of a suburban scope to it, more small town projects than big city projects. And the reason that is because just this, it's the numbers game, right? It's a sheer numbers game. As you live in places that you're dealing with denser population dynamics that you're working with, the work that you have to do is higher to make dents in the community, and the payback is lower. Unless you're moving in swaths of people at a time, like what took place at the turn of the 20th century, or in the 19th century and the turn of the 20th century, right, where you had tens of thousands of Irish coming at a time, or tens of thousands of Italians or Jews, or whatever the case may be. Like, yeah, if they enter the city in droves in those kinds of numbers, then you can really make a dent in the cities. But if you're talking like just a pocket of people, that's all that you have to work with. We kind of have to be realistic of what we're capable of doing and getting away with. Now, I do believe that we need to make inroads in the cities. I'm not against that. I think that Catholics, actually, especially, are poised to be able to do this in a unique way in the United States, for the simple fact that we are a huge demographic in this country. Like, we have a massive block in this country. Now, those may not all be Orthodox Catholics, and the ones that tend to gravitate towards the city, probably a little less so Orthodox, but they're there. And I think, yeah, we should leverage that power as much as we can. And I think we have. I think Catholics have done a pretty good job of that. But we haven't kept the identity, the communal aspects in the cities like we should have. Because unfortunately, the scenario was, when Catholics moved here, the rich neighborhoods were Protestant, the poor neighborhoods were Catholic, the slums were Catholics. And so as Catholics began to work their way up the economic ladder, they moved out of the slums. And eventually the communities just fell apart. So I do think we can make inroads. I am a total what's the happy pill, right? I'm not a black pill person, right? I do think that there are inroads that could be made, and while some of it is going to be generational, some of it's going to take time, I think that we can see more of these things happening in your own lifetimes if you're just willing to make some strategic changes. Which is why, in this thing that I've done, the integrated life, there's 3 emphases that I've made for this project that I have, the integrated life. The first is the emphasis on the individual person, because you ultimately are the one that you are accountable to. I don't deny, we as Catholics, we don't deny the importance of the individual. As we as individual have dignity, worth. I'm a Franciscan, right? We Franciscans preach haxeity, right? That there is a unique thisness to you that is so unique that there's nothing else in the world that is you. So I'm very much a part of that. The second emphasis in the integrated life is on the home, because we need to have good, healthy, solid Catholic homes. And then the third part, which is the broader scope of the Integrated Life Project, is the project of the community. And I want to make sure that I think people get really overwhelmed when they hear community. They're just like, oh, that's that thing that's out there, that's over there. I've got no say in any of that. Somebody else is doing that for me, right? Well, the somebody else's that are doing that stuff are the ones who let's just say, the generally speaking, the secularists stepped up and stepped into those roles, and we see the downstream effects of when the seculars step into the roles of community organization and community, the building up of these communities. We see the downstream of all of that stuff. Even the community that I live in right now, there's a lot of work to be done in this community right now. A lot of rainbow flags all over the place. But there's also, in my mind, again, I'm that young man that I was 10 years ago, sitting in that parish, in that little town, and I'm looking at this parish, and I'm looking at the devastations of the 80s. But I have a vision, right? I see the parish bursting at the seams with Catholics and chant and beautiful liturgies and community, right? And then when I'm living right here, we were very intentional in the place that we picked. I have this vision of this community that I'm living in being a strong, solid Catholic community that's not going to be singled out. We're not going to make it to the Crisis Magazine articles when you hear the top 10 Catholic cities to live in. You're not going to hear about my community, because I don't want you guys to hear about it, right? If you happen, like word of mouth, maybe. This reminds me, there was and it's probably still out there, there was a website about where to find traditional Latin masses, or where to find traditional masses in the United States. And it's all these little parishes across the country. And the previous parish that I worked for, they made that list. I was so angry when I saw us on that list, because we have a very solid liturgy at that parish. But I'm just like, who snitched? Who narked on us, right? We have a very insular tribal sense that we didn't want to be like, you don't necessarily want to be in the spotlight when you're not prepared for it. Because then who knows what the next bishop may do if he knows you've got that little, you protect yourselves, guys. That's like a big part of this stuff. Gather your resources, gather your strength, and in time you will begin to see these changes. And I was just a friend of mine right up the street here. He and I have conversations about this, and he brought it to, I hadn't even thought of this, right? But he said, it's a very powerful thing that in this little village that we live in, this little coastal village, there's two, and it's a small street. It's a main street, but it's a small street. Main Street, USA. He said there's two homes on this main street that have home altars, right? We have our home altar, and they have a beautiful home altar that kind of blows ours away. And he said, think about that. This little town here, and two people, the power of two families, right, praying. That's the kind of stuff that causes revolutions, that causes these massive changes to take place. That's the kind of ways that we get back the culture, the return that we're all just looking for, that we think is just magically going to happen somehow. Well, it begins with community building. Community begins with you, the work that you do, begins with the work that you do in our home. I place a lot of emphasis on the health, the spiritual, mental, and physical health of myself and my family, so that I can then turn outward to the community and focus on the spiritual and mental and physical health of the community. And that's what I want to help you guys do. So this is, in a sense, it is kind of a long infomercial for this longer project that I'm doing. I don't really expect to gain many of you guys to joining that project. If you do, God bless. I mean, come join us. It's going to be a very transformative thing, I think, for a lot of people. But It's not going to be a very showy, flashy thing. It's not going to be the kind of thing that we're going to end up making like the front page of the whatever the Catholic article, the Catholic magazines are out there. But what you're going to find is that the legacy of the communities are going to eventually transform and spread outward from there. And I do believe that there will at one day, if we're strategic, if we've read our Art of War. Art of War has multiple applications, by the way. That's why I don't necessarily quote this book so that you guys go out and pick up your chariots and start warring with one another. But I bring this book up so much because there's multiple applications. And if we're strategic, if we have visions, if we have goals, if we have a little bit of a foundation, most of us do. Most of the places that you go in the United States of America, there's at least the residual remnants of a Catholic culture that was once there, right? The little parishes that were built, these little communities that are like the few Susans that are left. Maybe she's in her 70s or 80s, right? But I need you guys to stop looking at it in those terms because, again, when I was sitting in that parish, it was almost exclusively gray hair. The walls had been whitewashed. The floors had been carpeted. The music was awful. But I saw the future of that parish. And here we are, I would say less than a decade. It's maybe been a decade at this point, but probably less than a decade. All of that has come to pass. And I think that we can do that over and over and over again in your community. So that's my rant today. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I am going to come back around to some of this stuff. There's a lot I want to say about it, but I kind of have to taper these conversations because not everybody's interested in this, right? They want the juicy stuff. They want I refuse to feed you guys scandal. I'm not going to become that as much as, but I did release the thing last week where I maybe picked on avoiding Babylon a little bit, but I felt the need to come out and make that video for a very specific reason, but I don't typically do that. Most of the content that I'm going to be making is focused towards the theology, right? That's the stuff that I mainly feed you guys. But I want to also introduce you to these things that it's very near and dear to me, and I see it as my sort of my life's mission and my life's goal. And so God bless you all. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you have questions about it, please reach out to me. You can easily find me on Causing Trouble over on X. If you leave a comment below, maybe some way to reach out to you if you have questions about it. I have built a framework, and there's a lot of other smarter people than myself too that I've leaned on, but I've built sort of a foundational way of how you guys, all of us can help rebuild and revitalize not just the Catholic faith, yes, but also the Catholicism of our lives, of ourselves, our homes, and our community. So that's what I have for you guys today. God bless. Take care.